Okay, can I say good evening from Table Tennis Scotland? My guest tonight is Peter Charters. He's one of England's premier coaches who oversaw the development of Matthew Syed and Commonwealth champions Alison Gordon, Bro and Karen Witt, and many other national players. The Amiga Table Tennis Club, which Pete was responsible for, was a hotbed for budding table tennis stars. His contribution to the Reading Centre of Excellence was immense. However, it was during his time as chairman of England's selection committee that Pete took a lifetime interest in ratings and rankings, leading him to instigate the inaugural computer ranking system. So welcome to Pete. How are you, Pete? Good?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Fine, thanks, Dave.
Good.
What's it like up there? Cold?
It is cold, yeah. When were you in Scotland? Was it about 18 months ago, Pete?
Yeah, I met up with you and Richard.
Yeah.
Yes. Lovely Edinburgh. Very impressed with that place. Beautiful city.
Brilliant. Paul Whiting is no stranger to Table Tennis Scotland with his compelling account of player to coach in his previous Zoomcast appearance. Paul has experienced various ranking systems, both as a player and as a coach, and he's got a lot of important information to give to the watching parents. John Hanna won his first senior cap just before lockdown and has first-hand knowledge of the hugely successful and highly popular Centrals rating. So welcome to Paul.
Evening, Dave.
And welcome to John.
Hi, everyone.
Good. And once again, Matt will be my co-host, picking up. It's got a lot of interesting questions, but in the background, who you cannot see at the moment, is Matt Norbury. And Matt, again, will be picking up all the responses on YouTube and email. So, Mark, birthdays, do we have any?
Well, Dave, you're setting yourself up because it was your birthday, wasn't it? Since we were last on air. So I hope you had a lovely day. I'm sure watchers will wish you happy birthday. The other birthday I wanted to share, just because he's got the same surname as me, is Anders from Edinburgh, Anders Lundberg, who I met once at a tournament, and we introduced ourselves because we have both not the most common surname. It was very interesting meeting. So happy birthday, Anders. Hope you've had a great day.
Brilliant. Right, we normally start off with our principal guests, which in this case, it's Pete and Paul. However, I'm going to hand over to John because he's been very involved in central ratings and he's got some important announcements to make, John. What are they?
Yeah, so with the rating central system, we can see how people have improved over a period of time. So one of the things that we've been doing previously is looking at the most improved players in Scotland. So I've got a list of the 20 most improved players in Scotland for the 2019-20 season, because obviously the 2020-21 season hasn't happened. So I'll start off with places 20 to 11, and then a bit later, when I talk a bit more in depth about Rating Central, I'll mention the top 10. So the 20th most improved player was Alistair Crofton. Then it was from Aberdeen. Then it was Shannon Brown from Dumfries, Ewan Walker from South Ayrshire, Ryan Khalid from Drumchapel. In 16th place was Tyler Leishman from Stirlingshire. Martin Johnston, after his trip to Dusseldorf, was 15th most improved Scottish player. Danny Badger was 14th most improved Scottish player, so well done, Danny, on beating Martin. Maya Wojcicka, I don't think I've met her before, but from Aberdeen, she's 13th most improved player. Then two Murrayfielders, Ben Jamieson in 12th and Charlie McGowan in 11th. I'll come back to me later for the top 10.
Brilliant.
There's still hope for me. I can still be in the top 10. I'm sitting waiting.
You may be 21, Mark.
Oh, John, don't spoil it already. I was sitting here waiting.
Okay. So when we come back to John, he'll tell us roughly how the central, well, not roughly, he'll tell us how the central rating systems work, and he'll also be announcing those top 10 players. So I would like to go back to Peter who we've just introduced, and Peter, you're a coach.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, you're playing at the you're coaching players at both the Amiga Centre of Excellence. You're coaching at the Amiga Table Tennis Club, the Reading Centre of Excellence. You then become chairman of selectors. So how did you get involved or interested in rankings and ratings?
Well, in England in the late 1970s, early 80s, the selection committee was actually responsible for producing the ranking list, which seems odd now because I've spent most of the time since stating that selection and ranking are different. One doesn't mean the other. But this was at the time was based on opinions. Selectors sat around the table, discussed a few important results, and then based largely on opinion of the selectors, they put an order. Now, at that stage, the order was essentially a seeding list, still is, in my opinion. I think it's very important to understand that is the main reason for having a ranking list at all, because when you put them in an order, you then say that what you're trying to do in your tournaments is to try and get the best, in theory, the best two players in the final. So a seeding list, ranking list, is at that stage very important. But that's what it is. It's not a lot more than that. And I think I might interrupt later on to hear different views about what people understand as a ranking list. But at that point, when I went on the selection committee in the mid 70s, I thought, apart from the fact of being surrounded by ex-international players, which made me a little bit uncomfortable, I thought I had to earn my corn by producing something to help with the ranking list. And I did produce a index card system with the name of the player, where they currently are, their wins, their losses, and then basically it was every selector had a box of cards that they would reshuffle in order to put them in a new order. But that was a fairly short hop from there to realizing that if we could do all that on a computer, which, mind you, was fairly new those days. I say I was a teacher and I didn't even have a computer in my classroom at the time. But if we could put it onto a computer, then that might make the system seem more professional. And Stan Lenton of Lenton's of Coventry volunteered to sponsor that. He provided the software and the hardware. So we took it to him. His computer man ended up producing a system. He'd already done something for golf, but he ended up producing a system which we were really grateful for. Very professional. The hardware, software was all produced by them. And we went then to produce what we call the Lentec list in the early 80s to sort of spread around the country. On the first year, we ran parallel systems. We ran one as a wins only and another one as a wins losses system. And these had the same results inputted. And at the end of that first year, we decided that we would go with the wins only. The danger there, as people foresaw, was to have just favor the players who went into every tournament, played every single weekend. But in reality, it didn't favor them at all. The lists that we produced were very, very similar, very similar. The wins losses system we rejected purely on the grounds that some people didn't play very much and went up. One person from Essex who had retired at the beginning of that year didn't play at all, had gone up 5 places at the end of the year on the wins-losses system. So simplicity indicated that we should go for a wins only. And I still believe that with some inputs differently, that is a good system to use. And it ran for quite a few years, did the Lentex system in England. And it was fairly simple to work out where you were going to be. Matthew's brother, Andrew, was so intense about it. He could work out where he was going to be the day before the publication of the ranking list. He could work it out, and he was always about right, 1 or 2 points out, but he was always about right as to where he should actually be. Now, I think that's a good thing. The fact that, you know, the people who've got the time and the inclination can actually work out the results of their ranking without knowing too much and going into it in too much depth. So that ran for some years, did the Lentex system. It was popular in most quarters, unpopular in a few, but it was the kickstart. Nowhere in the UK had used a computer to do ranking. It was all opinion based or a mixture of information that and an opinion at the end of the time. So, but essentially, a seeding list is what it is, or any ranking is, in my opinion, and but it's a terrific motivator for young people. Get on the ranking list in Scotland or Wales or Northern Ireland or England is a motivator for them to want to go further, to want to improve, because the thing that I have got really excited about over the years is when number 18 on the ranking list insists that he is a better player than number 19. And in my view, that's nonsense. There's groups of players. Your most accurate position on a ranking list is at the top end. Normally, number 1 is your best player. Not always, but mostly is your best player, number 2, 3, 4, and so on. It's also trying to get into the top 4. Now, the top 2 to start with, because of treating as a seeding list, it's very important that you want to be either 1 or 2, if not 3 or 4. If not, you can go to 5, because that when you look at it as a seeding list, that's a very important thing to try and get. But it was successful. It was the first one. It's been improved since. Clever people with the modern technology can make it better. But the basis of the work on the computer was done back then, late 70s, early 90s in England, and it blossomed since.
And I just, some of the viewers wouldn't know this. The way it was weighted was excellent. I think it was, if you did well at the English close, there was a factor of 5. If you did well at the 3-star tournaments, it was a factor of 3. So therefore, you needed to do well in the big tournaments to get the big points. The weighting is really important.
The most important win was when you won at international level. In your England shirt. That was the priority. So that was top of the list. Then the nationals, as you say, and then down through the relative tournament. And the weighting system, without a good weighting system, you're doomed to failure, because they've got to know, the players, the parents, in the case of the youngsters, have got to know that that event counts for more than that event next week. And the weighting system, as you say, is crucial. But we started with the international to make sure. I mean, we had the problem that they've currently got in England, where Liam Pitchford is their best player. I think most people would agree with that. Liam Pitchford was the best player. In our time, Des Douglas was the best player. And if you had Des Douglas at 5, it'd be laughed at, and no one would take it seriously. So you had to find a system which allowed, clearly in the men's case, it was Des. In the women's case, it was Jill Hammersley Parker. they were the best players at international level. And if they kept winning when they played international and they then won the nationals and perhaps one other tournament during the course of the year, that was enough to keep them in their top position. So you've got to be careful about you want people to take it seriously, that it does mean something, and it's an indicator of your approximate position, and it is approximate, rough guide to selection, I used to say, and that's what it is. It's not you don't say I'm going to select the top 4. You shouldn't anyway, because I don't think that is the wise thing, because any ranking system is a rough guide to selection, a rough guide to ability. There is no such thing, in my view, as a ranking order, an accurate ranking order of ability, because that means your 21 is better than your 22. It might be true, but it also might not. Your number 28 might be better than both of them. So, but it's a fantastic tool, a motivator. There's so much going for it in terms of what it can show people to motivate youngsters in particular, but also motivate older people as well. Vets are really keen on their ranking list, and it's a wonderful tool, but it must be known for what it is, and essentially a seeding list.
Yeah. Okay, Pete, that's brilliant. Right, Paul. Now you're from an era where you would have played under a ranking system, and now you're coaching under a ranking system. So I'd like to get your thoughts both as a player and as a coach.
Yeah, well, I've played under all 3 systems, Dave. When I was a junior, I played under the card system, as Pete called it, where a selection panel actually put you into a position. And then as a senior, I played under the wins-only system. And latterly, I've played a few competitions under the win-loss. And I think it doesn't really matter what system you have. It has to be fair, and it has to be easy to understand. And for me as well, it's really important that it does motivate the players to play. You know, I think quite often you see it where Pete spoke about Andrew Syed knew his rankings really well. He could work out his ranking positions. Some players do that, but it can also have a negative effect. Where there's a losses system, people may shy away from games. And, you know, I'm not saying that's right, but I have seen it. I have seen it where people have been at a tournament. Maybe they played one event in the morning, not played too well, and pulled out of an event in the afternoon, saying that they're going to be afraid to lose points. So I think a wins-loss system can have some sort of negative effect. I quite like a win-only system. And I think if you compare, if I look back to when I played well, I moved up a list. I moved up the list. When I had a good period of playing, under every system, when I had good results, I moved up the list. From a coaching perspective, it's really important that not only I educate the players, but educate the parents as well. And I totally agree with what Pete said. What a ranking system should be used for is for seeding in events. Like I'm a tournament referee as well. So knowing what the ranking system is, and that it's purely, you know, it's for us to seed tournaments is the most important thing for them to get their head around. You know, it gives you a rough idea of where you are, and it can motivate, but it's really important that parents aren't always looking at the list and trying to pressurize children. You need to move up the list.
Great.
You know, it's very, very rare would I use a ranking list as a goal setting tool for a child. You know, I'd look more at their performance than what I would as you need to be number 10 or you need to be number 8. In England at the moment, from a coaching perspective, invitation to tournaments can come from a ranking list. So maybe if you're in the top 10, you get invited to the Masters, or if you're in the top 32, you might get invited to the national championships. So there is some merit to you getting further up the list. It does open some doors for you, but as for a selection tool for teams or national selection, I would say it's just one of the elements you take into consideration.
Good. Okay, that's a pretty good start. Right, now we'll go. I tell you what, I'd bring Mark in before I go back to John, as we've not heard from Mark yet.
I just want to explore a little bit of points that you've touched upon from Pete and Paul there, just about the more the youngsters. So I mean, go back to you, Paul, initially what you said there about as a coach of using rankings to motivate, but not use it as a be all and an end all. But just to raise the point is, do you think it's a hindrance for younger players growing up where they're trying to develop in the game, trying to find their feet, where you may have seen players giving up because, oh, I want to get higher in the rankings, I want to be top 10 in the county, or I want to do this, and I'm not doing it? Do you think that there's too much pressure going on younger players for not rising rankings quickly? They might give up the game earlier.
I think it can be, Mark, but it's the way you sell it to them. You know, it's the way you sell the list to them. Like I wouldn't, if we were picking a club team, I wouldn't pick it purely from the ranking. You know, you would pick on form, you'd pick on commitment, especially with the younger age groups. Yeah, styles of play when you're looking at playing against other teams. But you know, once you put that figure there, I'm number one or I'm number two, it's a way you sell it to the players, and not just when you talk about young players, it's educating the parents as well, that it is a rough guide to what your level is. And like Pete said, you know, you're in clumps, really. You're in clumps of, you know, maybe 1 to 5 are equal, and then there may be a gap between 6 and 12 or 6 and 14. But you know, I think as for people giving up, I've never experienced anyone stopping because they're not rising up the list. You know, if they weren't rising up a list, then I'd be looking at what I'm doing with them and what they're doing in training and how they can improve. So if you link it to performance, if you perform, like I said when I was playing, you know, if I performed well over a period of time, I would move up the list no matter what ranking system was in place. You know, if I was having good wins, then I would move up the list.
Brilliant.
And conversely, if you're not doing so well, maybe you drop a little.
Pete, what about obviously being involved in a club of so many elite players? I'm sure there was obviously players coming through as well, starting in the game and reaching a good level. What's your thoughts on that, of obviously the pressure of younger players trying to rise rankings?
Well, my original club was just a one-table converted wartime prefab. But we had 15 members, all of them were juniors. And there was rivalry within the club. Andrew Syed and Jimmy Stokes, who some of you may remember, used to loved practicing with each other all the time. They weren't keen on practicing with Andrew's younger brother, Matthew, because they were pretty good against Chop anyway. But we found other people to practice. So with the group, you know, as Dave put earlier on, we had Karen Witt, who was a Commonwealth champion later on in her life, an English champion, and Ali Gordon was, so they will practice together, Mandy Smith. So the quality of the players that we had at that club was pretty good. I mean, basically, we had the whole of the England junior girls team in our one little club, and it was a little one-table club. And there was rivalry between them, but they were also basically learnt that if they didn't, although they were rivals, if they didn't work together, none of them would succeed. And therefore, there was an ethos, if you like, of this is a group of players. All right, one might be number one might be number 3, but it didn't matter. You work together to all achieve success. And that, if you like, that ethos that we had going was the reason that they were successful, because none of them thought they were that much better than anybody else. We had because no one wanted a push against Matthew, there was a wheelchair player called John Jenkins, who was pretty good at that time in terms of GB representation. And he wanted to push. So Matthew learnt his pushing against a wheelchair player, John Jenkins, who would chisel it into the corners, touch it short, use all sorts of variety of spins over the table, which benefited them both. And Matthew in later life has always appreciated that, because the players who basically would try and topspin against Chop only wanted to play Matthew a certain percentage of the time. but it's about cooperation. It's about them learning the belief that, as I've always believed, that the improvement is basically in the training hall, is that they always improve a bit their competitiveness in tournaments, but improvement is basically in the training hall. What goes on in the tournaments informs what you do in the training hall. You come away after a weekend, this weakness was exposed, let's work on it. It's that sort of attitude that in the training hall is going to produce the results. So it was a small select group. We had one or two players who were really good to practice with. Paul Savins, David, you may remember him.
Yeah. Paul
A
Savins,
good player, but was, for one reason or another, was not going to be the international prospect that the others were. But he was fantastic at his feeding and his play, and he would work really hard on the table. There was no one actually messing about. There was no one wasting anybody else's time, and all of those factors produce a small 15 boy girl club into one of the most successful clubs at that time in England. And that can be done. I mean, I hate to say this, but I suggest you've got a few one table clubs up in Scotland. That is no barrier to being successful if you get the right coach, the right ethos within that club about trying to achieve the very best they can be. And that's it in a nutshell, really. And the ranking systems just support that. Okay, we had, I'm going to go on a bit, but we had, at one point in time, we had girls, junior girls in England. We had the 1, 2, 3, 5, and 9 in England. We had 5 players, all in the top 10. And that was the ranking system, but it didn't mean to say that they didn't work with each other. It doesn't even say that number 9 was that much worse than number 2. It didn't work. That was the ranking system, which we used to motivate the youngsters in the club.
No, I think that's a fascinating insight, Pete, of just obviously a structure of obviously the hard work. We've obviously touched upon it of these many sessions we've done about the training hall and the hard work and practice and players taking responsibility. Rather than, I suppose the point is not blaming something else. I'm not high enough in the rankings. Actually, forget about that right now. Concentrate on your own game and trying to develop. But actually, I just want to throw just a final point just before I hand back to Dave. Just to John. John, we obviously, for my perspective, knowing you quite well, you maybe as a junior on the outside of the top, maybe the top 5, maybe just slightly outside that, pushing towards maybe Scotland selection at schools events, but maybe there's other players above you. But looking at you now is the hard work that I've seen you put in, where you're knocking on the door of the Scotland team, as Dave mentioned, getting your first call up. What about rankings for you? Did they motivate you when you're younger, or you're just thinking, actually, I just want to be a good table tennis player and I'm going to work hard?
Rankings when I was growing up made very little difference to me other than boasting at school, because there was a guy that played in my school, so I like to annoy him. No, they made very little difference to me, and the honest truth is because they didn't really reflect the standard. So I didn't, but I was aware of that and I wasn't perturbed or upset by that. As you say, I was sort of always just in the top 4 or 5, but there was a lot of things that, sometimes I was above a player and I was like, how am I above him? And then the opposite quite a lot as well. So for me, it didn't make a difference at all, because they weren't, and also the selectors didn't necessarily go with the rankings. They went with lots of other criteria, which is a different story. But they didn't necessarily pick on players who would be the 3rd best to join a team of 3. They maybe picked, oh, well, he's a bit younger, or, well, he's left-handed, so we'll pick him because we've got 2 right-handers, or, well, he gets on better with them, or, oh, well, my selector's from this club, so I'm going to put one of my players in there. So it was a lot different. The kids these days, I sound very old now, it's very, very different 5 years ago and back from what it is now. Now there's we have 7 or 8 selectors from various places. We have a ranking system that, you know, we can talk about later, but we have a ranking system that isn't just sort of numbers out of thin air. There seems to be some structure to the selections. So really it had no bearing on me because it was so bad.
Right then, John,
That's the honest answer.
Can you now tell us about ratings, which is very, very popular, Rating Central?
Yeah.
Dying to know about it.
Yep.
Sorry, Dave, what do you consider the difference between ratings and rankings?
No, it's that's the name.
Yeah. But is there a difference?
No.
No. Good.
No, Pete, I think it's a very good point. It always confused me as a player. You have a rating and you had a ranking, and then trying to marry the two up, I think as a player, always very confusing.
Yeah. I've noticed some sports call it rating, others call it ranking.
Yeah. Okay.
I never understood what's the difference between an essay and a composition. I never understood that at school either. Right, Central.
So, for everyone watching, what I'd invite you to do is go on to just Google Rating Central, and you can click on the website and go to info, and under that part there is a how the rating system works. And basically what I'm going to do is talk through that page. So if
John, would you like Matt to make you a co-host and you could get it up on the screen, or would you rather just talk it through?
It's okay, because I'm not going to go it goes in depth. I'm not going to cover it.
Okay.
But I invite people at home to do that, to just Google Rating Central, and it tells you, go to the info section. It's got players, events, clubs, go to info, and then it will tell you how it works. And you can follow down sort of as I'm going to, I'll condense it a bit. But anyway, so while some people are doing that, what do I think we want from a rating system? I think it should order players as best it can to the standard of the competitors the best it can. I think it should allow for comparison of players directly, and I think it should help aid selection. I also think that it should be objective and independent, and away from subjective decisions. So I will talk about Rating Central just now. So Rating Central is a state-of-the-art, fully automated online rating system. It uses probability and statistics alone to give values for players and assort them in a ranking or rating list. Now, there are 2 numbers that you will see beside any Rating Central player. There's 2 numbers. The first number is the player's something called the player's number, and the second number is got a plus minus before it, which means it's an uncertainty principle. So that's more to do with the Rating Central website and software. So the first number is the number that's your rating, but the other number is also very important in working out points gained or lost, and various other things as well. And it should be said, if your uncertainty principle is too high, then you would get taken off the rating list until you play another tournament. So what the rating system assumes is it assumes that there has to be one best average number to compare players, i.e. that one player has effectively an average. This is how they play. That's over all age groups. So you're not getting a different number for cadets versus juniors versus seniors like you would in some other systems. Now, what I'll do is I'll scroll through the website now. So there are basic concepts here. My mouse is gone. There we go. Now, so we assume each player has a playing strength, and that's the first number. And the playing strength of a player does not change during a single event, but it can change over time, of course, and that's how rankings, people go up or down and the rating changes. So if we knew the playing strength of 2 players, no matter whether it was me versus Ma Long, we couldn't for sure determine what player would win, even though it would be Ma Long, since the weaker player can always have a small chance of beating a strong player. So there's this thing called the probability of upset function that the Rating Central uses. And basically what happens is, in layman's terms, if there's an upset, it works out how big the upset is and awards points based on that. right? And if anyone's looking at the graph, they can see that if you're 100 points behind, the probability of upset is 20%. So that means if Mark's 100 points ahead of me, the likelihood that I will beat Mark is 20%. And the likelihood he will beat me is obviously 80%. If you are the same rating, the probability is 50%. So it's an even match. If Mark and I had the same rating, it'd be an even match. Now, what's interesting here is that it's something called a logarithmic scale. So it increases as you go along. So 200 points difference is, if you were 200 points difference between me and Mark, the likelihood would be 4%, not 96%. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is that what it allows you to do is fairly accurately assess between the points difference how likely someone is to win. So more than 200 points, it's less 4% or less that they're going to win the game. Anything shorter than that, within 100 points, they're much more likely to win. So the rating actually has a bearing on probability. It's not just a sort of random number. So you can see how closely the players are grouped in the rankings. You could have 7 or 8 players within 20 points of each other, even though that, number 17 to 24, they might be, 10 points difference or 20 points difference. That they're all basically the same. So it gives quite a nice picture. Now, the other thing is that the second part, the uncertainty principle, basically there's a lot of complicated stuff that people can read if they like, which I won't go through here because I won't have enough time. But the second number works out the probability that is your rating. So in effect, it uses standard deviation to see how wide a berth from that number that you have you should be. So one thing that the system does is that if you've not played for a while, your uncertainty rating goes up, and when your uncertainty rating goes up, the machine presumes that you have a wider berth of where you could be on the rating system, and adapts the calculation accordingly. If you play a tournament every week, for example, the Edinburgh League, then the machine has a much narrower idea, a much closer idea, and a much narrower window of where you should be, and the uncertainty principle goes down. So every time you play, the uncertainty principle goes down, and you're the machine can work out that it's getting narrower and that you're more likely close to that number, and vice versa. If you don't play for a long time, it'll go quite far out. So the machine, as I said, puts in something called the temporal update, which is it takes into account the passage of time. So when we all come back after COVID, there'll be a lot of big point changes, and that is purely because nobody's played and the machine goes, I haven't seen these people play for a while. There could be a big difference in their playing standard, which for me is probably unfortunately going to be true. So that's basically how it works. There's a lot more complicated things I can go through, but I don't think it would be that useful. But for anyone interested, I would highly encourage you to read through the information page. It's got diagrams, it's got worked examples, it's both concise and clear and detailed. It's kind of what you need to know as to how the system works. There's a couple other things, a couple issues that people have said before. Some people have said that their points are different. If Mark and I played, maybe he would gain 14 points if he beat me and I would lose 22. The reason for that is not because the machine's made a mistake or whatever, it's because the uncertainty principle is different. So if I haven't played for longer, the machine takes away more points from me because it doesn't know it has to give a wider berth for where I could be. So some people have mentioned that and saying, how can he gain 14 points and I lose 22? That makes no sense, or So that's one thing that people say. The other thing is people say the numbers don't add up. You get a lovely little table with I've played so and so this competition. I won, lost, and some people add up the points and it doesn't add up. But the reason for that is the machine's very, very precise and it uses rounded numbers. So let's say Mark beats me, he gets 10 points. Actually, Mark could have got 9.51, and the machine will say that is 10 points because it rounds it up for us to be the nearest point. So sometimes those points can be a point or two out depending on the tournament. And some people have talked to me about that and said, John, your machine can't even do basic adding up. Just for people if they had any issues with that. So that's really all I wanted to say. That's just a brief introduction to the Rating Central system. But as I say, completely automatic, completely statistically derived. The machine only takes into account match results. It doesn't take into account anything else. And the only human input is at the start, where you have to give a player a rating. And Rating Central suggests that what you do is you put the player in whatever caliber of tournament the player's playing in, you give them an average of all the players in that tournament, and then they get that rating. So yeah, that's the only human input there. Everything else is completely statistically derived. So yeah,
I think one of the attractive things, John, is when people enter a Central Ratings tournament, they know that evening exactly where they've finished, or certainly the next day. And I think that's what they appreciate. They're not waiting forever.
yeah.
The results are online either that evening or the next day, which again, it's constantly being updated, almost match by match, which is
right. Yeah, at tournaments at the Edinburgh Banded, for example, I just sat there and did that the whole day. Had some tea and went through every time a result came in. I put it in the computer. So at the end of the day, everyone had the results. And as you say, it's completely transparent. Anybody in this call could go in and look at my rating and go down in the history and see where I won, lost points against what opponent. You can see at the end of a tournament, oh, he was a big gainer in the Scottish National Championships, or he didn't do so well in the Scottish National, he lost a lot of points. Yeah. So it's very transparent, and yeah, it just helps, you can scrutinise it and say, I didn't lose to him, or if there's been a mistake or whatever. It's very, very obvious if something's gone wrong, and stuff can be checked. So that's another good thing about it as well.
Dave, just to come in there, I think it's also an important point to come up. We've obviously got questions coming on YouTube, just also regarding our own ranking system, or our own in Scotland, where there has been massive problems, where there's not been anything really published over the last year. I think what John has done there is give us an insight of the complex nature of a rating system or a ranking system. And the problem in Scotland that we've experienced is there's been software failures. So the reason, and I'm not an official spokesman for this, it's obviously on the behalf of this channel, is trying to give an explanation to our viewers that they run into massive software issues with 365. So I think what John has given us an insight of the problems that can occur if that whole program goes down, then trying to fix it has created massive issues. But the good news for our viewers is that Neil Cameron, obviously one of our top players, has taken this on as a project and has been working with 365 to try and get this updated. And actually, as of today, there has been positive news that this has all been fixed. And we hope over the coming weeks that there will be an up-to-date ranking list published. But there's nothing more frustrating as a player who's played in tournaments where maybe there hasn't been a ranking system produced for players. However, I think what Pete's touched upon there earlier is it's only a part of being a table tennis player, but there's no doubt at all it's an important part. So it just obviously for the questions that have come in from Billy Main, other questions on YouTube, Graham Stevenson, I think, submitted a question before we even started tonight. I hope that gives some sort of explanation. However, there's no doubt at all it's been frustrating for players.
Good. Right, Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Dave, the more complicated a system is, the harder it is for people to work out. But the thing I really want people to take away is that the more you improve, the further up the list you move. Even the system that we've got in England where we've got losses, it's still a progressive system. So people see it as you could lose points, but if you and myself are equal and we're on the same rating points and we play each other twice, you win once, I win once, we both actually move forward.
Yeah.
So the more you play, the more you actually move forward. And like Pete said,
if you win,
if you win one each, yeah, because you actually win more points and you actually lose. But people see it as when there are losses in there, that it's a negative thing. But I think if you use a ranking system as a guide to your approximate level, then you won't go too far wrong.
No.
Yeah.
Pete, anything to add?
Well, I was very impressed. I mean, it's a complicated system, and he lost me in about the third explanation. But no, very good. For me, it sounds really good. I've just WhatsApped a friend of mine who might be really interested in getting into contact with John because they want to start something similar, perhaps in England. But it's very impressive. I mean, all of it all of it, I mean, I think as Paul said, it's somewhat difficult for us ordinary people to understand, but it seems to be right. It seems to be along the right pathway, but not the only one. There are lots of ranking systems out there, and you have to design it for what's best for you.
Yeah, I think not just the ranking system, Pete. I think your competition structure needs to tie in with the ranking system as well.
Yeah.
So that your weighting system at the right events, so players can select the right events to play in, that they don't have to play in every single event. So I think your competition structure needs to tie in with your ranking list, your ranking system.
Yeah, completely agree about that. And it's the end product, the list that you produce. If you're having people constantly arguing about the results that the system comes up with, then I wouldn't be happy about that, because I think people want to accept it as the system. But from everything John has said, I think that's fine.
What I would also add to that as well is that it's been used for various things. So for the British, British League, all those the Premier results and Division 1 results go into the system. All the ITTF registered sort of events, the French and German leagues, Chinese Super League, all those results are in the thing. So in the system. So if you go on the system and type in top pro players, it gives you a ranking for those players, because people put in the results. And something that's different from this system, from 365, is that every match is treated as an independent. It doesn't matter where it's played. That's the match. You don't get more points for a national championships quarter-final win. You don't get any bonus points for getting there. It only cares about who did you beat, who did you not beat, and what it allows, and there's only one rating as well. So what it allows is, instead of looking and going, well, he's above me in the cadets, but I'm above him in the juniors, you just go, that's my rating, and I can follow the trend, and I can say, right, okay, what's happened here? I've moved up 100 points, let's say within 6 months, and then this last 6 month period, I've moved up 4 points. Why have I only moved up 4 points? What's going wrong? So it's, instead of it being a number that you have that doesn't really relate and can't be tracked, and then gets 10% deducted at the end of the season to restart the next season, this is my rating and this is how it stays, and I can compare myself to the player I was last year and the year before and so on, and see my trend. Am I improving? Am I stagnating?
One thing I really one thing I really liked about it was the fact that you were saying that they come away from the tournament and they know their ranking straight away. I think that is something that we're thinking of. We need to have in England. It does mean that there is some input actually at the tournament
all the time
to make that happen. I think that's brilliant. I think it's so much. I've been looking recently at one of our players who plays in France, a junior who plays in France, and the ranking system that they have there, that's what they have. They come away from a tournament, they know instantly on their phones where their new ranking is based on the results, because everything is done at the tournament. I think that's definitely the way forward.
It may well be the same one, because the French Pro Leagues results and stuff are all in this. All the European youth stuff, all that stuff goes in. The British school, anywhere you can get a tournament that's registered and online, Rating Central's lets an authorised sort of admin person put it in. So yeah.
Okay.
I think Dave, can I just say, I think the system that you've got, where a player's got a rating and that rating carries with them all the way through, is good. Because one of the negative things I've seen of a system, where cadets go to juniors, they'll carry their cadet points into the juniors.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen is that they get an inflated position when they first go into the juniors. So they'll carry their cadet ranking points into the junior list with a 10% deduction from one season to the next. But their actual position that they'll go in, that they'll have more cadet points than they would have had as a junior. And then they tend to drop. So that initial 6 months of being first year junior, you tend to see a lot of players go in high and then drop. And that can have a negative effect. So I think the system you've got, where their rating carries with them, is probably a better system.
Can I say I just forgot? I didn't announce the top 10.
Oh, go on then.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
So, everyone be fuming if we finish then. Right, okay. This is the top 10 most improved players from the season 1920. So number 10, his brother was on the list earlier. It's Kieran Walker. Kieran Walker from South Ayrshire. Number 9, our highest ranking female player for improving is Naomi Proven, North Ayrshire. Jamie Toner is at number 8 from West Lothian. Jacob Monroe from Dundee. Well done, Jacob. I had absolutely everything to do with that rating. No, I didn't. Daniel Tibbins from Aberdeen is at number 6. Ben Hart, who's been doing a lot of work with Stephen Gertson, I've seen online from Stirlingshire, is at number 5. Alan Key, I don't think I've ever met, from Aberdeen, but well done, Alan. Harry Blackhall from Aberdeen also. Well done, Harry. You're at number 3. And then the top 2, both belonging to North Ayrshire, so well done, North Ayrshire, are Nathan Hogg at number 2. And then the most improved player with a points increase of 363, which is insane in a year, is Chad Duncan. So well done.
Well
Chad.
done. Well done, Chad.
That's probably why there's a lot of guys from North Ayrshire on tonight. They knew that was coming on. The players. But no, well done, guys. I mean, I did shocked that my name didn't come out, but
yeah,
I'll get past it.
Was Stephen Gertson on that list?
No, he's too busy doing online programs.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what next.
Right. Okay. I just want to, we did touch on this. I'm going to ask Pete, and they did partly answer it. Is should selection be based on rankings, Pete?
No.
No.
No. I mean, the thing is that I would treat ranking as a rough guide, as I would everywhere on the ranking ratings system, a rough guide to ability. When you're selecting a team, you are looking at the best players and a small group of the best players. There's loads of factors. Do they get on well together? Are they good enough to start with? And to be honest, I trust the coach's view, because they know that a player can wilt under pressure, that it look good for a while and then can't handle the pressures involved. And there are pressures which sort the wheat from the chaff. There are factors. Styles was mentioned earlier, with Dave Barr and with Matthew Syed, who were at my club. Then both had a slight advantage, because if you were selecting 4 players for a 3-man team, you would want someone a little bit different. Now, it's either different in a number of technical ways, but certainly if you've got a defender and you know that some countries don't like playing defence, then you've got them there to bring them in. So there are lots of factors involved in selection. Ranking is one of a dozen different aspects, perhaps not a dozen, perhaps 6 different aspects that you select on. But you want your best team, the most rounded team, the team that support each other, that there's a camaraderie, and yet there is a rivalry, because if you're a number 3, you're playing at number 3 in a team, you want to be playing at number 2. And whilst you don't want people who blatantly sit on the bench and hope that their team member loses so that they get a chance, you don't want that. At least they've got to hide it, and so that everybody is aware that they're all supportive of each other. So that is just another factor. But clearly, if you were selecting an England team now, you'd put Liam Pitchford in, because he clearly, not only number 1 on the ranking list, but he clearly is number 1 in terms of his performance. You then start to debate number 2. It currently would be Paul Drinkle, because of experience and strength. Number 3 would be Sam Walker. But then you start to debate, really, do you want somebody else in? Do you want to put a younger player in? Because that player could be your Liam Pitchford of the future. So there's a lot of factors to discuss. But a straight 1, 2, 3, 4 off the ranking list. No, I wouldn't.
And also, Pete, if I can ask you this question, because when in your day, or our day, should I say, in some ways, is that the England teams went to a lot more events. So it might be the Israeli Open, it might be the Portuguese Opens. That also affects your selection, doesn't it, as well? It's where you might say, well, this is a weaker tournament, we'll take 5, 6 and 7.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the many factors involved, I mean, you wouldn't send, if I was going to a weaker tournament with the player, then I might leave my number 1 at home and give the 2 and 3 4 a chance. But yes, I mean, it's chewing it over. You don't make those selections for in 5 minutes flat. You talk it over. You throw in lots of different equations, which help, because you've got to think that you select for now, you select for the future. Those are the two aspects. For now, you want your strongest team, your strongest players, the ones who've proved through experience that they are the most reliable, that they've got the talent to play at a high level. The ball's going to keep on coming back. When you go to a higher level, you think it's, the shot that won you a point in your local tournament last week isn't going to win you a point at international level. You've got to be able to recover to play your next shot, and whatever it takes to win in a national shirt. But yeah, no, there's judgment. Obviously, we'd be less concerned about playing in the Israeli Open than we would in the European Youth, European Senior Championships. There's a different aspect to it.
Paul?
Yeah, I think from captaining teams, when I like people saying about European youths, the ranking isn't even on your mind. It's current form, confidence as well is another thing to think about when you're actually picking the team that's going to play. So a player's level can vary massively depending on their frame of mind, their confidence, and their current form. So it's not. I wouldn't pick it purely on ranking at all. Like Pete said, it would be one of the considerations. And that's when you're selecting the team to go. But when you're actually in the corner and you're captaining a team, current form and confidence are two of the biggest things to help you select the players.
John, have you got an opinion on that?
Yeah, kind of similar to the others. Obviously, it depends how much faith you have in your ranking system, but ranking should never be the only factor that you're taking into account. I've several times in the teams that I've coached have changed players, whether it be for non-cooperation, whether it be because they're having a bad day, whether it's because they just simply don't want to play the match, or whether it's a tactical thing about styles, or it's a bit more complicated, but it really does help. Rankings obviously are important, but they're not the only thing that can be considered. Just because you're number 3 in the ranking doesn't mean that you're going to be in a 3-man team. If you're horrible, don't really care for anybody else, don't want to practice, don't put your all in for the team. There's a lot more to consider. But yeah.
Mark?
Yeah, totally agree with the guys' comments. I think I would use a personal example that I shared when we have a chat offline about this with the guys. Was when I was a junior, in the last year of the junior, I was either ranked number 2, number 3 as in my last year, and I never got selected for the European Youth. And I was furious at the time, because it's a long season, it's an amateur sport. I'd been to the 3 previous European Youths before that. I felt on merit I had to be there. But actually, on hindsight now, 20 years later, or whatever it is, absolutely the right decision not to select me, because it was the last year of a junior. Did I put the work in as I should in that last year at practice and all that type of stuff? Probably didn't. And the 2 that were selected above me or for the team had another year left to go. And I think that's the dilemma of any selector or any coach or whatever you're trying to do, is what is the best. And I refer back to my point earlier of a younger player. It's different, I think, obviously, to a senior team and you're trying to win home nations. But I think as a junior, what's the development of your country or youth players coming through? So just to echo the guys' comments that they've made, it's not all about rankings. And I think from personal experience, I get that now. But at the time, it doesn't mean it doesn't hurt for a young player when they're not selected and they're higher in the ranking.
Yeah. Anything on the chat, or have we covered all the chat?
There's maybe just a couple of points, Dave, if we want to finish off what we're talking about, but maybe not related to rankings or ratings. Do it just now, or?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. So John, Graham Stevenson wants to know how we're getting on with your psychology part of table tennis. As you see with your attention to detail of how you describe Rating Central. So when you do qualify as a doctor, I think we all should not be worried of how much attention to detail you would put into it. So
I would very much be worried. So I did, for those that don't know, I did a research year last year, which was only mildly interrupted by COVID at the end of the year. So I did a project on table tennis about the forehand smash, about looking at muscle activity, looking at joint angles, and looking at psychology and how all these things interacted. And, I did get some nice results. I did the dissertation went fine. I'm currently going through, I've been a bit lazy to be honest, but I'm currently going through with people. I've made sort of articles. You have to submit to different publications to get it published. You can't just sort of like put it up somewhere. So I've got like an article that I'm working on to like submit it to a science journal, sports science journal kind of thing. So hopefully soon, but I can't promise anything. But the dissertation is done. I can send anyone a dissertation. It's 40,000 words, so but it's done, and I just need to get it sort of condensed and written into an article, and someone needs to agree to publish it, basically. So that's the stage I'm at. But yes.
Did Steve Gertson have a question?
Yes. So Steve Gerson submitted a question for you, Pete, beforehand, and it's not really table tennis related, but I was quite intrigued by it. But your connection with Brendan Rodgers, the Leicester manager, ex-Celtic manager,
Liverpool manager.
And Liverpool manager as well. Reading as well, wasn't he? So it was a bit online and reading some about it, but your influence on Brendan Rodgers and your thoughts on that, Pete?
No, I don't think I influenced Brendan. I when I retired from teaching, I was given a 2-year contract at Reading Football Club to become their recruitment officer. Yeah, so I would have a gang of scouts that I would send out 20-mile radius of Reading to bring them in for training. Now, Brendan Rodgers worked in the same office as myself, and he was the assistant youth coach, assistant youth manager of the whole thing there, and a really nice bloke. I mean, I must admit that he would be one of my favourite people in football. I was never impressed with the football fraternity that much because it's dog eat dog really within the professional football, and I'm just glad I only spent 2 years in it. But Brendan was the exception, an absolutely gem of a man, and so we got on quite well. I think I was a father figure to him even then. But he would talk about work rate, and this is where Brendan was so good, is that I returned after those 2 years. I went to back into table tennis and became chairman of selection again. And I took groups, the YDS, we used to call it, Youth Development Squad, to Lilleshall every 4 to 5 weeks. We had good sparring partners, Des being one of them. We had some good coaches. Carol Moore led the way. I sort of oversaw it all, I suppose. But I know that one year I was there. Now it shows you Brendan's work rate. We were there every 4 to 5 weeks for a long weekend at Lilleshall to train, and Brendan was there the whole time, the whole summer. He was studying at the football school there to improve himself. And when I say be the best you can, that is a Brendan Rodgers expression. He says that all the time, be the best you can. And he's a fantastic bloke, and I'm really, really pleased that he's made a success of a football career because he's one of the nice guys in it. And Yeah, very, very keen. But it was his work, his commitment to improvement. Never a great player because injury killed him off. We used to play football in a place called Elm Park, the old one before Majewski came along to build a new stadium. And I remember I went on a football injuries course with the chap who used to do it within Reading Football Club. And there was this young man sitting on the bench once, and we were looking at his knee because this was what was going wrong in his knee. And years later, I found out that young man was Brendan Rodgers, who was injured before his career really got underway. But his work rate is the outstanding thing. Is we talk about, talent, but we also should be talking about work and commitment and desire and ambition, all of those things. Brendan Rodgers was top dog at that. And you felt that, given a break, he was going to be a very successful manager. And of course, that's turned out to be true. Great guy. Love him.
That's awesome, Pete. Thanks for that. Hopefully, awesome. Steve will please with the answer. And John, I know that you're a Celtic fan, so I hope after Pete's answer, you've forgiven Brendan for leaving Celtic. So
yeah. Yeah.
I've just seen another question come in on the YouTube one from someone. He asks, it's Ping Pong Selector, I don't know who that is, but he asks, how is Rating Central so accurate when it favours the Edinburgh League players, as all the Edinburgh League results are inputted and the other leagues in the country are not? That's a very interesting question. A lot of people say that to me. I don't know exactly what, how this person's describing the favouritism, but I've got a few suggestions. One, it could be the Edinburgh players don't lose as many points in that person's eyes. The reason for that is because they play more, they're inputted into the system more, so the system has a smaller uncertainty rating, which means that if they lose, they don't lose many results, but if they win, they also don't get as many points. People with a bigger uncertainty rating can go up and down a lot more. What's also interesting when people ask me this question is that Aberdeen has been using this in the league, and yet nobody says, oh, Aberdeen players get favouritism for it. So I do think it's a bit of selected thinking, but I can see why, with the maybe not understanding the uncertainty principle kind of thing, you might look and go, why is that Edinburgh player only lost 5 points when somebody else with the same ratings lost 12? Why has that happened? But it's because the machine goes, well, I'm fairly certain they're about there, whereas I don't really know what you're up to. So yeah, there's pros and cons to both. But if obviously if it was implemented in every single league and every single tournament in Scotland, then you'd have much more accurate ratings and uncertainty is lower for everybody. So that would be a good thing, I agree.
There's me trying to step away from controversy, John, and then stepping right back into it again. I think obviously from knowing it and speaking to a lot of players in Scotland, I think obviously the point remains is that the complex nature of rankings and ratings and trying to put things together. But I think the overall point that everyone's made tonight is you need, whatever system you're using, you just have to be confident in it. And that does make a difference. And I think where we are in Scotland, we're not quite there.
I'd like to sort of just, because the development side is most important. We've looked at picking or selection policies and picking players. One for Pete and for Paul. How would you select for the Reading Centre of Excellence, Pete? And then I'm going to ask Paul a similar question for Plymouth. Would you select your best 10 players, or?
I would select in the way that I always have done, and that's select for now, select for the future. So you'd want your best players, and it would be down to the coach to judge what that means. It wouldn't be down to the ranking list. Ranking list might have an influence on the coach, but the coach would say, this is the small group of players that I want for now, the best players. But there's a few youngsters there who have the right attitude, who have the right talent, who have the right work rate, all the things that Brendan used to go on about. Are they committed to being a top table tennis player, or do they want just to be the Aberdeen champion, or do they? The secret on the YDS that we ran, the one I was talking about, Lilleshall, was that I used to sit them down at the start of every weekend. What do you want to be? Do you want to be your local league champion? Do you want to be English champion? Do you want to win? And what we always came to, I've managed it, they always come to the conclusion, they want to win in an England shirt. In your case, they want to win in a Scotland shirt, because that for me is the so if I had the right answers, and I felt that they were giving me genuine answers, they weren't giving me can I say bullshit? They weren't just being pleasant to me. They because they knew what I wanted to hear, but that I could feel that there was a genuine ambition there. Then that would be my choice. Select for now, select for the future. So because if you don't do that, you've got nothing coming up behind, and those coming up behind put pressure on those already there.
Yeah, Pete, would you put in a player who's never going to make the England team, but is going to be a damn good sparring partner? Would that affect your selection? A good steady?
No. I think you get confused signals then.
Yeah.
And you confuse signals to the rest of the players. No, I wouldn't.
Potential and
unless I was short of a player or two. I would bring in sparring partners, top quality sparring partners, to bring them. The best player in the room has to be your sparring partner.
Yeah.
So I would bring in Paul at the top end there, and let everybody try and get past him.
Yeah. Paul, again, you've got your centre of excellence. Who are you going to pick?
It would be on commitment and work rate for definite. Obviously, it depends what competition you're playing in. There's always a time to give younger players who are committed a chance to play. But styles would come into it as well. And like I said earlier, current form as well. If there are two players who are very similar, current form and who's committed out of those players, who wants to really push on and see if they can not only play for England, but win for England.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to take this? Who wants to start with that? I mean, what are the factors? We'll make that the last question. I mean, there's so many. I mean, if somebody's going to retire at the end of the season, even though they could be a best player, that might affect. Injuries might affect a selection. University commitments might affect a selection. And any others? I actually have a whole list, but
well, I mean, from my perspective, obviously looking at it, obviously selectors, it's exactly what Paul and Peter said. It's that commitment and that development of a player, or what you're looking at, and obviously how they're fitting into team structure. I think if you're going away for a trip away, how would that player fit into that? But ultimately, it's always very tricky. If your number one player, you obviously look at a football example that we've used tonight, is that the star player sometimes isn't the one that's most liked in a team. But ultimately, being the star player sometimes puts it there, and you're more looking at other players of that development going into a team is who brings the most it. But hard work always probably has to be the main thing that you're looking at, is how much do they want it.
Yeah.
I think talent. Sorry, Dave. I think yes, all of those things are true, but talent does help.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're talking about this YDS that we ran, and Liam Pitchford's still at primary school, along with two of his schoolmates, Daniel Lowe and Sean Cullen, who were all decent players. Sean Cullen in particular, I think, was a decent player, but talent, I mean, as coaches, you just looked at him and knew that he had something special. Yeah. But the big advantage was that he was a hard worker, a real trier, a grafter along to go with him. But he did start off with an advantage in terms of pure talent. When he would stroke a ball, it went on at speed. No, you go. But in the end, the one who works hardest is going to be there for a long time. But if you can find one with serious talent right from the start, then you've got to promote them. You've got to push them. not push them in an aggressive way, but encourage them to go, give them ambitions, give them targets. All of those things count.
Yeah, good. That's a good note there, Paul. Any? That's a good note on Pete to finish. Paul, have you got?
Yeah, I just think I think if especially young players, if they focus on their development and working to improve themselves as a player, no matter what ranking system you're under, you'll move up it. You know, if you develop yourself as a player, if you work on your weaknesses to improve yourself as a player, you'll move up the list, no matter what ranking list you're under.
Yeah. Talent and motivation. John, your finishing words?
No, I would just echo the last statement, and I would say it was kind of said to me by quite a few people, but mainly Eddie Still, who said that it doesn't matter. No one cares how good a junior player you are. Everyone cares what you're like when you're an adult. You know, don't worry about I was number 2 cadet and then now I'm number 3 minor. Or it doesn't. No one. I couldn't tell you the top minors. That's just true. I just couldn't tell you. No one really minds. What's important is that you develop as a player so that later on you can get into the big competitions and play for Scotland.
Learning to win, learning to lose, and then you reach your potential at about the age of 26. So everything is a gradual incline up until then. Mark, okay? Any more?
No, I think it's probably one of the most lively ones we've had tonight, Dave. I think there's a lot of debating points where I think all points are valid, but it's difficult to say 100% is someone right. And I think that's what's fantastic. And I'd like to point out, after 30 odd sessions, we had our first swear word. So thanks for that, Pete. That was our first swear word. I've been waiting for it. And I thought I'd be the one that would slip up.
It's after
you can bleep me out if you like.
Okay, well, look, thanks for all the viewers. Lots on the chat line. It's been a really interesting session. A big thanks to our 2 principal guests, Paul Whiting and Peter Charters. Big thanks to John Hanna as well on our local international, our Scottish international. And as always, to Mark for keeping me right. And see you soon.
Yeah, well done, everybody.
Bye-bye.